He was a boy who learned to measure the world in breaths. On cold mornings in Nauen, where the air tasted like metal and the sky hung low with the promise of rain, Klaus-Dieter found that the thin white ribbon of his breath could be counted like beats in a drum. He learned to listen to the rhythm of his body long before he knew the names of records, medals, or national teams. He ran because movement made sense the way counting did. It was simple and absolute, a language of footfalls and wind, and the steady, irreducible fact of putting one foot in front of another until the ground became less of an obstacle and more of a collaborator. As a child, he chased high clouds across potato fields, tears of laughter cutting through the cold. His mother would watch him from the kitchen and call out, soft and amused, "Klaus, come inside. You'll catch your death." He never went in right away. He would stand panting and look at the sky and feel that tiny electric hum of wanting, to move faster, to push harder, to find out what would happen if he did not stop. The house smelled of bread and coal smoke, and the world beyond the yard felt like a secret that belonged just to him. When someone first suggested he try sprinting, it felt inevitable, like a next step he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. The coach saw something he later described in interviews as a natural quickness, an ability to leave stillness behind with a violence that looked effortless. The boy in the narrow town shoes learned to explode out of starting crouches like thunder emerging from a quiet sky. He practiced the geometry of speed, knee angles, arm carriage, the crisp cadence of breath and foot and eye. He learned in the cold, hard way that speed has an architecture and discipline its builder. East Germany in those days had an appetite for excellence that ran through every corner of sport. It found its way into sleep schedules, school curricula, and communal pride. For Klaus, that machine of expectation was both a ladder and a crucible. It gave him access to coaches and tracks and training partners who pushed him, until he discovered reserves of pain and resilience he had not known were there. It also asked for everything: time, privacy, sometimes even the sense of whether what he was giving was theirs or his own. He learned to put on the uniform, to do the drills, to let the stopwatch's tick become a metronome that disciplined not only body but thought. He remembers, in fragments of memory sharpened with time, the first track that felt like a contest rather than a playground. The cinder dust would smear across his legs. The cold would make each inhale a small bite. Other boys ran for fun. He ran because it had already become a vow. The early races arrived like tests, an ache that was also a truth. He began to understand what it meant to be singled out by a name that the loudspeakers would eventually learn to say with a kind of foreign respect. Kurrat, they said, and somewhere inside it felt like an unlocking. He rose through the ranks with a quiet consistency that confused the loud. He was not flashy. He did not celebrate ease. He kept his head largely down and let the track speak for him. In the junior championships, his legs took him past boys who had grown up thinking they would be the stars. He tasted victory in small, sea-salted ways. In the shrill cheer of a crowd, the improbable weight of a youth medal, the brief dizzying idea that the sound of applause could be a new kind of warmth. But medals are only one side of a story of a runner's life. The other side is arithmetic. Early mornings, tendon aches, the slow theft of sleep by anxious rehearsals of starts, the repetitive ritual of acceleration drills until the hip loosened and the hamstring wavered. Klaus learned to nurse his body with patience and an almost artisan care. He came to know physiotherapists like old friends, the careful tapes on skin that felt more like armor than medicine. Nights were for mental runs, for replaying races in his head, for whispering to himself the lines that steadied him. Lean into the wind. Step free. Don't be afraid of the pain. It is a compass. The international stage moved from an aspiration to a fact of his life when he stepped on foreign soil in his 20s. Montreal, the Olympic Games, the ocean of faces and flags and languages. It was a place that shimmered and demanded. In the weeks before the relay final, the team trained in a bubble of calm so dense it felt unreal. The relay is a choreography of trust, and Klaus learned to treat baton exchanges like prayers, brief, precise, full of the hopeful terror that the entire race could turn on a misfired hand. In the tunnel before the final, he stood with his teammates, shoulders tight in that small, warm place behind the stadium, and listened to the muffled roar build up like a storm. He closed his eyes and tried to put the world into a smaller square, a manageable task. Get into the block. Run your leg. Trust the man who will hand you the baton. Finish. When they ran, It felt as if the universe paused in recognition of a sequence done perfectly. Their silver medal that summer was less a surprise than a consecration. He had done what he had trained to do: measure his limits and push them outward by a sliver. He learned, too, the ambiguous nature of victory, an elation tempered by the knowledge of who had run faster, who had taken a fraction more of an advantage. He felt pride like a warm stone inside his chest, but also a new hunger. The medal sat heavy on the neck, proof of belonging, yes, but also a reminder that the race is a mirror in which one always finds a margin yet to be claimed. There were dark hours, too, because sport at that level is stubbornly intimate with failure and fear. Injuries arrived like uninvited guests. He learned to watch for the small betrayals of muscle and joint that grow into larger ones if ignored. He practiced the slow art of recovery. The ice packs that hugged swollen tendons, the gentle stretches done with the patience of a bonsai gardener. The physiotherapist's hands working methodically to coax function back into tired limbs. In those moments when rest replaced training, his mind could become a dangerous place. He had to fight boredom that turned inward, turn the long hours into plans rather than desserts. He learned to hold still like a person who knows that for every step forward, there are hours of immobile, necessary repair. Beyond the track, he was a man of unexpected tenderness. He married later, not out of snobbery or scheme, but because the kind of life he lived demanded someone who could understand the rhythm of absence as well as presence. The world he inhabited took time and asked for it back. A partner in that world had to be patient, but not complacent, loving, but not expectant. In quiet moments at home, he would cook and listen to music that softened the edges of his day. A record playing in the background, the clink of dishes, the warm, ordinary rituals that reminded him life existed beyond lanes and stopwatches. Those moments were treasured not for their drama, but for their simple proof. He could be immovable in pursuit of speed, and still be human in ordinary, delicious ways. Training camps were like monasteries of motion. You learned to live by the clock, warm-up, drills, intervals, strength, cool down. The days that hurt the most often produced the deepest satisfaction. Klaus found solace in repetition. He embraced marathon training blocks measured not in distance but in refinement. Cadence adjustments, foot strike nuance, the exact angle that allowed the toe to flick off the ground just so. He treated the start as an art, the way the fingers curl, the tilt of forehead, the first explosive centimeters that decide a race. There were days when the world felt narrowed to that tiny geometry, when the whole human drama was decided in the split second between gun and motion. Sometimes rivalry came with the taste of salt on the lips, bitter and invigorating. He had opponents who would push him to a faster clock simply by being there at the line. Friends, too. Teammates who stole sleeps beside him in distant dormitories, who shared cigarettes under the stars in secret rebellion, who kept the conversation light so the heaviness of competition would not crush them like a wheel. Those relationships became scaffolding. Within them, he practiced being both vulnerable and fierce. He laughed more in those company of camaraderie than the public ever knew. He told bad jokes, misremembered lines from films his teammates adored, and stubbornly lost at cards because he liked the company more than the winning. The race of a lifetime is rarely a single moment. It is a concatenation of efforts, of disappointments turned into habits, of small adjustments made again and again. Kurrat's greatest achievements were not only the medals that glinted in light, but the consistency that allowed him to stand in finals, to be chosen for relays, to carry his nation's flag in pieces sewn into the clothing of a team. He learned to be comfortable with high stakes, to treat pressure as an old friend who nudged him into focus. When he ran the 100 meters and came 7th in a final at an Olympics, it taught him humility and the beautiful cruelty of sport. It allows you to be both extraordinary and ordinary in the same breath. Change for him came not with fanfare, but with the slow shift of context. The world was reshaping itself in ways that athletes everywhere could not ignore. Lines between nations and ideologies blurred and reformed, and the corridors through which a man like Klaus traveled shifted underfoot. As his competitive years slowed like a tide, he turned his attention to what running meant beyond podiums. He began to teach, not by sermon, but by example. The precise way to place a foot, the listening discipline a runner must have toward their body, the mental games that are as important as physical training. When young athletes came to him with nerves and bright eyes, he became a mirror and a map. He would say quietly, "When you step into the blocks, stop listening to the world. Only listen to your breath and your body. Let the rest be noise." He loved the small, domestic triumphs that had nothing to do with clocks. He would stand on the edge of the training ground and watch a young runner finally get the exchange right and feel it as a personal victory. He savored the moments when a trainee found the joy in repetition and discovered speed as the byproduct of honest work. When he spoke of his own past, he did not mythologize pain. He framed it as a currency spent and invested. You pay for the thing you want, and sometimes the account balance is heavy with grudges and aches. But the wealth is in the discipline itself. There were nights when the ghosts of races would visit him. He would hold a cup of tea and imagine, in a small private rehearsal, what would have happened if he had leaned a degree more, if his hand had been a hair faster. Those counterfactuals were not poison. They were instruction. He learned from them like a craftsman learns from a flawed piece. Annotate what went wrong, correct the groove, keep working. When the political world around him changed, he watched not as a spectator, but as someone who understood both the privilege and the cost of the life he had led. He had represented a system that asked things of athletes in exchange for a place on the map of global sport. He had been fed into races by people whose motives were complicated and often opaque. His gratitude was to the sport itself, to those fleeting seconds when all the world's noise washed away and the pure fact of motion remained. He kept that part for himself, guarding it from cynicism like a talisman. In public memory, he became a quiet hero, a man whose feet had carved a path through the history of sprinting and whose temperament later shaped those who would follow. He was offered invitations to speak, to coach, to be the elder in rooms where speed was still worshipped. He walked into those roles with the same humility he had in competition. He taught the art of breathing, the mechanics of relaxation at the start, the psychological trick of shrinking the race into a manageable set of tasks. He taught more than technique. He taught how to live in a body that asks for extraordinary things and how to pay attention when the answers are small and stubborn. At home, far from stadium noise, he favored simple pleasures. The smell of fresh bread, the way sunlight slanted through his kitchen window in late afternoon, the soft conversation with friends who remembered when he was young and reckless. He loved stories of runners who had nothing, who found a lane and stayed. He liked to listen rather than speak, because boom and braggadocio had never been his style. Private to his soul, he kept the sensation of his first victorious sprint, the ache of an Olympic final, the warm weight of a medal, as if to remind himself of what had been possible when a body, will, and time come together in the right strain. He understood legacy as a quiet echo, not a neon sign. The athletes he coached, the runners who came after and spoke of him in the hush of locker rooms, were his true testament. When they told stories, they always mentioned his voice the way people describe a reliable weather: steady, calm, and universally welcome. He taught respect for the sport, for the limits of one's own organism, and for the humility to accept both victories and the lessons that losses deliver. In the end, his life's narrative is not a tale of sustained domination, but of persistence. That crystalline human gift to keep returning to the start line, to keep rehearsing the improbable geometry of acceleration into triumph. He taught that the race you run for others is important, but the race you run to know yourself is indispensable. In each inhale before a gunshot, in each conscious tightening of the toes on the blocks, in each tiny internal promise to not yield to fear, there was a devotion that outlasted medals and seasons. If you listen to the stories people tell of him now, what emerges is less the sharpness of statistics and more the contour of a life well run. A boy who chased clouds and learned to last, a man who turned the pain of training into the currency of character, a teacher who handed on not only technique but the quiet, stubborn idea that speed is a way of seeing the world. Clean, honest, relentlessly moving forward. And so, to the young person watching this now, the message he carried was simple. When you stand at the blocks of whatever life asks of you, breathe. Feel the ground underfoot. Trust the training you have done alone in the dark. Step. Do not let the applause be your aim. Let the oath you make to yourself be the pull. Run because you love the act of moving past doubt. Let that love do the rest. If Klaus-Dieter Kurrat's story moved you, If the way he turned small moments into a lifetime of meaning sparks something inside you, then share that spark. Like this video, tell a friend about the runner who turned breath into rhythm and discipline into quiet triumph. Subscribe to Behind the Medal for more stories that remind us that every medal sits above a life of choices, of mornings run in the cold, of dedication that asks little and gives everything. Help us keep these stories alive. Like, share, and subscribe, and let the quiet courage of athletes like Klaus-Dieter live on.